People often say that Sweden doesn't have a lockdown at all. It's not completely open. We have what I call a soft lockdown. So the crowd can only be 50 people, for example. The restaurants are open, but you have to have 2 meters between the tables and so on. And there are a few other things. The higher schools are closed, not for children, but for teenagers and up, the schools are closed. So there are a few restrictions. This disease spreads like a fire, and what you do doesn't change very much. Everyone will be infected by the virus, everyone in the world, in the end. There's no scientific evidence for most of the restrictions that countries take. And I think politicians, it's important for them to show strength, activity, action, and that's a big reason. And then there's at least in Europe, countries followed each other. When country X saw that country Y did something, they said, oh, we must do that too. We must have this restriction in our country as well. So there's been a race between politicians to some extent. There are a few scientific things. We know that washing hands is good. We've known that for 150 years, that you should wash your hands often. We know that we should keep some distance, a social distance from other people, not to get too close to them. We know that, but the rest, closing schools, no one knows if it has any effect. Closing your borders, many countries have told you you should stay at home in your apartment, which is strange because it's nice to be outside. You should be outside, and the infection spreads very little if you're outside. It's much less risk of infection. If you compare to the UK, to England, they have more deaths than Sweden, and they have a lockdown. Is lockdown good? If you look at Belgium, they have a higher death rate. If you look at Ireland, they have a higher death rate. And all these countries have a severe lockdown. So they should have much less mortality than Sweden, don't you agree? The United Kingdom had a very good strategy. And we were happy in Sweden because it's good to have a big brother who has the same strategy as we had. But then there was this report from Imperial College. You saw that the professor who gave out the report, he's resigned from his job. He had a strong influence on the British government, and they changed overnight 180 degrees. That he underestimated the number of people who are sick but who don't have very many symptoms. Because we're finding now that almost everyone with the infection does not have very much symptoms. He guessed 50%, the true figure is probably 98%. 98% who do not seek healthcare in the hospital. Some of them may be quite ill, and I've seen some of these patients are really sick and for weeks, long time, but they are not registered by the system, they don't come to the hospital. If everyone stayed at home for 2 weeks, the epidemic would disappear. But it's very difficult to protect the old and vulnerable because this is a very contagious virus. And if you live in a care home, a house for elderly people, it only takes one little mistake by one of the nurses or staff members to spread the virus inside. It's very difficult to stop the virus outside the care homes, the nursing homes. You want to have herd immunity, and the best way to get herd immunity is that the young people, not only young, but say people under 50, people under 60, that they mix freely, and you lock up or you tell to the old people to stay inside, and in that way you can quite quickly get a herd immunity.